Hi, so my name is Tom Piper. I'm an associate of Mountview. I'm actually a freelance theatre designer. I do set and costume, and I've also been involved in some of the finishes and the design of Mountviews auditorium. I'm working with everybody on the foyer and stuff that hopefully we'll get together eventually once we're properly allowed to work in the building again. Welcome to this Mountview live session, and I'm going to be in a conversation with Paule Constable, who is a world-renowned, award-winning lighting designer who I've been working with very closely on Freelancers Make Theatre Work, which is a big project we want to talk to you about. So the aim of our chat today is not really to go over our careers and things like that, but actually talk about the situation now, what we're trying to do about it, and hopefully offer some hope and guidance for those watching about what we hope the future might hold for theatre. So hello, Paule, and very nice to be here with you in our virtual world. We have been meeting quite a lot recently, talking about the world and freelancers and theatre, but I'd like to ask you first, what happened to you when this all happened, when COVID hit? What happened to your work and your world at that point?
That's exactly where I thought we should start. It's brilliant. I am getting to know your shelves very well. I was in Berlin in March, working at the Staatsoper on a production of Idomeneo with Vicky Mortimer designing set and costume, and it was strange because you could feel COVID getting closer and closer. In fact, even when we travelled out to Berlin on the train, I had a terrible cough, and I was very aware that everybody was looking at me and kind of giving me a really wide berth. But there was that kind of weird sense of unreality about the whole thing. And then it started to really land in Europe. The Italian outbreak started. La Scala Milan, there were a couple of members of the chorus who got sick. So the opera world started to become very sort of scared. And Berlin started to close around us. And the opera closed to the public, but we carried on working for a while, and then the restaurants closed and the bars closed and everybody left Berlin, and we were kind of
Why did you get locked in?
It was completely bizarre, and we were going in and out to work every day, because the Staatsoper is a repertoire house, so they desperately wanted us to get the work finished so they can bring it back whenever bring back is. But eventually, about a week before we were due to do the premiere, they said they'd film the dress rehearsal and broadcast that, and then they suddenly said on a Sunday, actually we're shutting the opera. And by then the whole of Berlin had shut down. Vicky had actually flown back, and I just thought, pack my bag and leave. So I think from getting the email saying that the opera was shut to getting a flight, and I very rarely fly, getting a flight back from Berlin was about 2 hours. How about you?
Well, I had a similar experience in Scotland, actually, with Scottish Opera, and we had the final floor run of Midsummer Night's Dream. I was thinking there with Dominic Hill directing it, and I had a crazy week where I thought, okay, I'm going to go back to London, then I'm going to have to come back again for the fit up, then go back to London, then come up again for the tech at the end of the week. And the production manager said, I just think you should go, and I went, and then on that train back on the Monday. 5 projects just dropped, by the wayside, and then by the Wednesday I was ill. So I know that I actually had COVID. So I had a friend who's a doctor who gave me a blood test. So I've sort of found out that I've had it. It wasn't too bad. I was ill for a couple of weeks, but I think it was also that sense of exhaustion of just like, and I think it's something that we've begun to realise when we've been in this moment of forced contemplation and fight really for the future of our profession, is kind of actually how ridiculous our working lives were and how we must try and work to do something different about that.
It was that kind of first period of calm when everybody was going, oh, we'll be off for 4 weeks, we'll be off for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and as you say, things started to stop. It was scary, but it also, as you say, when have you ever stopped? I was at home with both my grown-up kids and their partners, and you were just like, wow, this is time I never have. There was a kind of calm before we started to realise what was and wasn't happening in our industry.
Yeah, I think I realised, partly because of being ill, it gave me that time to think. And then it all seemed to be happening at once. Actually, lots of people suddenly began to realise that we weren't hearing from the buildings and the organisations and the directors or the collaborators that we normally work with. And so for me, a couple of things happened at once. One was Vicky Mortimer, who we both know very well, managing through the auspices of the National to kind of reach out to various theatres and go, do you have a freelancer that you could bring that could come and talk to me? And at the same time, Katrina Lindsay, who was sitting in splendid isolation, disconnected from any form of social media in Edinburgh, kind of suddenly reached out to loads of designers and said, actually, what on earth's going on? Do you want to have a conversation about this? And both of those conversations led to Scene Change and Freelancers Make Theatre Work up, which I thought was a very kind of interesting. It was obviously in the zeitgeist. We all reached a stage at the same moment where we needed to have those conversations.
Yeah, I think it was terrifying because none of us knew what was happening, because you know, the machinations of the politics of what was going on. I mean, of course it transpired that people like Rufus Norris and Lisa Berger were doing a huge amount of work to try and articulate.
Yeah, the people who run the National, if you don't know.
Yeah, sorry. Articulate the need for a bailout. But it's all very backroom, that world of politics and how politics, I mean, I have learned not only a lot about Zoom, but a lot about political systems and things like that, that I never knew that I was going to find myself in these rooms. But as you say, it was that moment, and it came through the London Theatre Consortium, and there were various buildings invited their sort of regular freelancers or people who'd worked with them in the last couple of years, just to come and hear what they were doing and hear what they knew. And it gave us all an opportunity to talk about our concerns. But also then we all fed back to each other as a group. And as you say, it was almost an overnight thing, wasn't it? That we went, oh my goodness, we have been left entirely out of the conversations as freelancers. And that's crazy.
And it's an interesting thing to realise, I think, and in terms of anybody beginning in this profession, you wouldn't really even think about it. And when you start off, you just say, I want to be an actor, I want to be a designer or a lighting designer. And you don't really think about the structures of what you're going to work in. And gradually over the course of my lifetime working in theatres, especially doing a lot of stuff in regional theatres and smaller scale, is that I've noticed, but only kind of recently, how much things have been stripped away from buildings, and that you used to have a system where you would go into a theatre, there'd be a costume department, and they would teach you loads when you were a young designer, and there would be a prop department, and there'd be the scenic artists, and there'd be the carpenters, and often they were all in the one building, or there was a little workshop just around the corner, and it was a self-contained ecosystem. And then gradually what's happened is that it's all become outsourced more and more, and we've had this sort of strange phenomenon where lots of theatres have been rebuilt with beautiful foyers and lots of facilities, but they've often stripped away some because they can't afford to do enough work, and they don't think they can justify it, lots of the departments. So we've become more and more freelance as a profession, and we now worked out we've got 70% of the workforce of freelance, and in a sense, by doing that, we've also allowed ourselves to become divorced from and slightly infantilized into the relationship of how buildings run and how work is made, which some people really enjoy because it means you don't have a responsibility. You just turn up, you do the gig. If you had a terrible time, you run away, get a great time, lovely party. But actually, you're not really invested in how that building works, making it work better the next time you come there.
No, and I think also, if you think about it, most buildings and companies now have one artist working permanently within them, which is the artistic director. And there's no, so often that kind of, I was thinking about somewhere like the National, where I spend quite a lot of time, and the kind of creative lifeblood of that building is carried by the freelancers. We're the ones who are coming in and out and thinking and being quite controversial and, questioning. But suddenly in lockdown, that wasn't there anymore. And that, I think, also, I think the buildings missed the conversation and the life of the freelance community as much as we missed the opportunity to work and make work and feel involved. Because we certainly, the majority of what we hear through the website is about people feeling very, very disempowered.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think they were also at that particular point, and it's still ongoing, you know, having to deal with, will their building survive? Will their organisation survive? How many people are they going to have to make redundant? You know, and the weirdness of the furlough scheme, that, you know, there were people there, but they weren't allowed to do anything. You know, and at one point people were trying to work out whether you could take a furloughed artist from one place and make them work somewhere else, and kind of create a daisy chain to try and, because all of those skills had just sort of like disappeared off the and we were left, you know, in the, I mean, it's very interesting how rapidly the Freelancers Make Theatre Work kind of managed to set itself up. And I thought that was an extraordinary kind of burst of creativity. And it was almost like watching people go into creating production or a tech, you know.
I agree. It just makes me think a lot about collaboration, you know, and I think one of the things I really enjoy about having created the website, and there's a very loose steering group, very diverse group who kind of feed into the kind of day-to-day of the site, and the activity of trying to hear what freelancers are concerned about and trying to kind of articulate that into, you know, encouraging people to write to their MPs, passing on kind of communication through to buildings, trying to make projects where the freelance voice is heard, and just representing freelancers as much as we can in as many conversations as we can kind of find our way into, really. But collaboration is so key, and engaging with complexity as well, which I think we so often have to do that when we make shows. We have to find quick answers sometimes, if you're, particularly because I'm a lighting designer, so a lot of my work happens, you know, a lot of planning and talking and thinking, but actually doing my bit happens at the sort of end, the kind of moment of crisis. And I think those moments, quite often, I think I'm dealing with rooms where the emotional temperature is quite high. And I think that that's true of how the freelancers were feeling, but also there was an urgency. So the kind of ethos that we've always tried to maintain is, we're expedient, we try and move quickly, but we try and be generous and to learn from our mistakes. So it's a kind of, that really reminds me of the world of making shows where you have to move quickly because you've got a deadline, but you also want to keep communication going, even if it's quite challenging. You want to keep talking. So I really enjoy that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely suits the lighting designer personality quite a lot. I mean, Neil Austin at the beginning was a complete sort of powerhouse of sort of like, it was like watching him run a tech. It was sort of like, you know, he was programming the website and kind of like, right, next, bang, 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 bang. And I've always admired lighting designers' ability to effectively sketch in front of everybody, you know, compared to the actors have had, you know, 6-8 weeks preparing their roles. The designers have spent months in the studio doing this. Lighting designer, you know, you put one light up and everyone goes, oh no, you know, like that. And you know, that was my first idea, and having that thing. And then I think, I mean, for me, the other thing that's really struck me about this whole process has been that it has enabled us actually to bring together a way more diverse room than often has happened in previously, and we've been able to, you know, through the call out, through the fact that we have a very open door revolving kind of policy, and even just the first people that theatres sent to join us, like, you know, Chino the writer, you know, and lots of Ola director. There's some really brilliant people of, you know, we admit that we are very white, privileged, middle-class, oldish people, and it's great to get those other voices in the room. For me, that's been a real revelation, and also being able to listen to them at this particular time.
I agree. I feel it's such a privilege to go on that journey, and that will, I mean, talking about, you know, as we look to the future, one of the things that I think has become unquestionable for me now is the nature of the diversity of the future, and how we move forward into that is, it's not optional and it's not part of it, it's central to it, because it's central to the way we work. And that sort of that engagement and that kind of looking sideways and moving together is really important, and I think we haven't done that enough as an industry, and we need to do it more. Yeah,
it has exposed to me, and I know Vicky would back me up with this, and And I think Scene Change, which is the designers kind of collective that's formed out of this as well, that it's exposed a really difficult problem for me, that we're trying to square a circle of saying to young people that this is a profession that you should aspire to come into, that has, you know, great rewards, you know, it's creative, the camaraderie, you're artist, you can create stuff, but at the same time it is in its current form totally unsustainable, that there is no career path, there's no guarantee, you know, that you will be the next great actor, the Idris Elba, you know, that you could easily just end up never working. And yet at the same time, we want to be called artists, but we also want a career structure. And those two things kind of, how we get those to match together. And I keep coming back to that problem. And it's one that I feel that we're hitting all the time. I don't know what you feel about that.
I think it's really complicated, and I think it's really exacerbated by the vulnerability of the freelance workforce. So one of the things that Freelancers Make Theatre Work collaborated on very early on was a survey of data to do with how everybody was doing. And because it's quite shocking, but there is no hard evidence data around about what freelancers do. And I think that nobody was meaning to leave us out of the conversation. It wasn't willful that we weren't being heard. I think people sort of had forgotten that we, the artists, the theatre workers, you know, that we weren't in the room. So we decided we had to, in order to kind of express the scale of the problem to government, we had to collate this data. And it was really shocking. As you say, there are 200,000 of us, it's 70% of the workforce. You know, 30% of those people, 35% actually, hadn't managed to get any support from COVID job retention scheme or from SICE. So already we were looking at 65,000 people who had been left with no support, whether that's because they hadn't had enough years of working freelance in order to qualify, or whether it was because they'd saved enough to pay their tax bill at the end of the year and therefore had too much saved to, you know, it was really shocking. So the cliff edge, as it were, happened almost overnight to many people. So the conversation is not only around what we do now, those things are stopping now, but for many people, and those were particularly kind of young entry-level artists and workers, and of course people from more marginalised communities, were suffering the most in terms of not getting the support they needed.
Yeah. No.
So it's, as you say, it's very hard to be positive about about the realities of that.
I mean, I think we are hoping to create positive actions. I mean, I think that's ultimately, you know, that we can't sit around just solely wringing our hands. I mean, I've had the example with Scene Change, which is the theatre designers one, where we created this tape action, which was a great kind of moment for us of sort of, basically, because all of the theatres had this hazard warning tape around them, kind of shut them off, especially the National. It seemed to us that fundamentally theatres were not toxic places and they should be rebranded as places that were forced to be shut, and we were missing live theatre. So we had this tape made up in bright pink saying missing live theatre, and then created an action initially with about 15 of us gathered around the Nationals. It was a rather wonderful kind of gathering of, a bit like a first day of rehearsals, because everybody said, well, I'm the designer and I'm a designer. It kind of went round and round. And then Anna was the one production manager in the room, so to speak. And then creating that, and that was really nice because it kind of tied in with a moment in the evolving story of will theatres open or reopen, and it gave the BBC a kind of a thing that could feature on their web pages, and it kind of linked into a whole kind of beginning of getting theatres back, which was sort of very useful. And it was a positive action, and I think that was what felt really important about it. It wasn't just simply wringing our hands, it was doing something artistic and collaborative. And then it also spread out across the whole of the country. So I think we did about 120 sort of bills in the end, recycling the tape, sending it off. Lovely video footage of someone throwing loads of tape out of a train carriage onto someone else as they zoomed past. So it was great. And really highlighting the whole theatre ecology. So actually I went and did Mountview with a few young designers, and they went as far up as Mull, and some, you know, prison break kind of their little van, and it really sort of showed what a massive sort of intertwined community we are. And that seemed to me is one of the kind of big messages that we keep on trying to get across to government, about the fact that they talk about the crown jewels, but actually the crown jewels are the whole ecology. You can't have these wonderful gems if you haven't got the drama schools, if you haven't got the amateur theatre, you haven't got all those local theatres building up to support, a Billy Elliot or and those kind of shows.
But it's trying to explain that, isn't it? Trying to explain the kind of complexity of roles and the richness of roles that it takes to make a show is, I think, something that it's very hard for people to fathom until they kind of enter into this world. And it's also interesting that thing about training, that you can have a fixed idea about what you want, but actually the more you work in the live performance, a bit like you doing the poppies or something, the more you realize the possibilities of storytelling and creative thinking, and the skills are specialist, but it's sort of endless possibility as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there's an element of, on one level, I don't want to talk about people having transferable skills because I don't want people to be lost from the industry. But on the other hand, actually, those people, obviously actors know this full well, there's multiple medias that you can go across. And certainly in my career, I've gone into big installation design, in a way, actually, partly because it's a way of reaching an audience that you don't normally reach, that you actually, I think in the Poppy tour, the Tower of London, and in the tour I did afterwards, I had 9 million people saw that work. That's more than we'll ever see any of the theatre shows that I do. And also it's, by its nature, populist in the kind of right sense of the word, it's accessible and culture that people can go and see. And I think one of the things that we question, we have to keep validating ourselves to government at the moment about, why are we worth it? Why is it worth investing in theatre? And I know, and there is this, what I don't like doing, but there's one of the arguments that does seem to work, is that, without theatre, you wouldn't have had Danny Boyle, you wouldn't have had the Olympic opening ceremony, you wouldn't have had all of these film stars without us. But fundamentally, I think that, again, it sort of makes it hierarchical in a way that I don't like. It feels like it really ought to be going, well, actually, without theatre, you wouldn't have those community theatre groups, you wouldn't have those youth theatre groups, you wouldn't have a community choir. Those are as important to the human soul as the big kind of mega blockbuster musicals.
Absolutely. And that actually, I mean, the engagement with community, the engagement with youth work, the most profound production I've done for years, was the production of Pericles. That was the community project at the National, where we had, 250 people on stage from all sorts of extraordinary situations. And it just reminded you of the importance of, people's lives were changed and can be changed, but also the educational possibilities of arts within, secondary school teaching. It's so vital, and it changes how people's futures play out if they're given the opportunities. Without going into it as a profession, just a bit of time and, what it can do in terms of confidence, in terms of, young people who engage with the performing arts are much more likely to go on to degree level education, and, and so it goes on and on and on.
I feel one of the things that I've realised with our kind of exposing the gig economy of how freelancers work is that we've allowed ourselves to get divorced from our communities, and there's been this sort of slightly hierarchical thing that you tend to do the community work when you're beginning, and it's the outreach bit of a theatre, and then gradually the more your career develops, the more you become a freelancer who's just running around the country or the world, and you're never properly really engaging with your local kind of audience. And one of the things that I want to come out of this, which I'm hoping freelancers will help be able to do, is to sort of start creating energy around kind of local theatres around and hubs of activity where you can actually start investing to create roles, associate roles or proper roles for freelancer artists back within buildings and organisations that can then start re-engaging with their local community and begin to understand them. After all, we ask artistic directors to go and live with the theatre that they serve, but the freelancers are never really doing that. And we've environmentally, there's so many reasons why it seems a good idea to me.
Absolutely. and it's funny, you were talking about, you know, growing up making work outside London and how vital that was to your journey and continues to be, because there's a sort of ridiculous hierarchy which feels really, really unhealthy. And actually, I find as soon as I'm working outside London, my shoulders drop a little bit and I relax into being somewhere. And you feel like you can really be somewhere. I mean, I was back in Scotland last year, and having not worked there for years, but all my early shows were up there. And it just felt like it was so much more engaged with, you know, with the landscape you were in, with the people you were in, with the sense of what the theatre was there for. I thought was really good. And as you say, we've all become quite commodified, so we're all sort of aiming for success. You know, that wasn't part of the idea originally.
Mm.
You know,
no, I mean, I still love working in Scotland, going up to the sits, and actually it informs my working process, which in a way is again something that I'm trying to evaluate now, about how unsustainable that process has become in the theatre design world now. The demand for creating more and more beautiful, incredibly expensive models, it sort of goes up and up. It's almost like you can't just do anything rough, because, you know, that's just not what one does. But the money isn't there to either pay for those materials or for the extra labor involved in making them. When I go up and work in Scotland, not that the standards are any lower. In fact, I think, you know, the standard of acting is often brilliant, and the kind of productions often, for me, have a really wonderful European feel to them. Great directors like Dominic Hill, Zinnie Harris I work with. But I've worked a way of working there where you kind of go, because you know those people, you go, actually, I'm just going to bring something quite rough, and we'll discuss the idea and then work out how to do it together. And the carpenter will go, you know, actually, I know, what about if I did that? And I go, yeah, you could do it like that. And for a lot of designers, that's a complete anathema. I mean, like, I know Bunny Christie will remake a model if one little dimension changes slightly, because that's how she has to do it. That's her way of working. Whereas for me, I feel this as exposed, and it's environmental too, that we need to actually, and you were involved with this before COVID started, trying to set up ways of working where we take control of the climate crisis and kind of go, as artists, how are we going to work in a different way? Are we going to actually use less materials? Are we going to recycle? Are we not going to invest in all this stuff?
But I think it's really interesting, because for me, Tom, all of this conversation, including the kind of freelance conversation, comes down to a question of values, true cost and true value. And one of the things I think that's generally happened with the arts in this country is that we've become way more commodified. So you can't really measure creativity, but you can measure what other departments do and produce. And to make really good work and to really embed yourself within the culture of a company and things requires time, but we don't put a value on time. We just put a value on producing a single piece of work and then leaving, because that's a fiscal value. We don't look at the kind of holistic picture of how was it making that piece of work, and how do you engage, you know, and all of our engagement with companies, apart from I know you have a long-standing engagement with the RSC, for example, and I do with a couple of companies, but most of the time we do a show and we leave. And actually, that's not good for anybody. It's not good for us as freelancers, because then we feel like we fall, or, you know, we live or die based on our most recent work. But also, it's not good that we do something and walk away from it. It's like we all need to spend more time, and yet time is money.
Yeah, and we're not sort of trained to do it. We have to unlearn those kind of, a bit like we have to unlearn racism, the same feeling. You have to kind of actually, and in a slightly sad way, this could have been a moment in COVID where if people had the guts to say, actually, I'm definitely going to program something in late 21, I want you to start working on it now, and given us the time. Those of us who are in the luxury of being able to pre-plan work like designers are, but you know, the other huge worry for me at the moment, side digression, is all the technical and craft production freelancers who have nothing to do. You know, they can't plan. They can't even put in for money. but it feels to me that actually we need to learn how to take that time in our creative process, in a way that maybe actually, when you're at drama school, you actually in a way have the luxury at that moment of having really quite a lot of focus and time to spend developing a particular production. Not that necessarily time makes things any better. I think you still need those moments of where you are up against the wall and you are firing, because it can all become a big flaccid pancake if you're not careful. You need energy under projects, but equally, we do need to give ourselves time, and that requires money, and alongside time is we also need to bring alongside loads of other people around us to mentor. It feels to me, and that's the other thing about the support structure that we realize that we need to do, invest in a lot more at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I keep talking about this fantasy I have of every job as a job share. So it's not like you mentor people by saying they're assisting you, but actually you put yourself in a parity with somebody and you kind of work together. Would be really interesting and really challenging, I think, because within that thing about how one thinks about values, one of the things that we have a lot in our industry is a sense of ownership. And if you break that sense of ownership, does that make you less of an auteur, or does it make the work stronger because it's more informed by different voices? Collaborate, there are brilliant models of collaborative work, and there are also brilliant models of work that's made with a very singular vision. But I think being bold about the process of how we make, and going back to Freelancers Make Theatre Work, I think there's a real sense of learning around collective action, and also hearing how people feel and the brilliance of the ideas that come bubbling up and through. And there's some really good, there are many companies also who are concerned about freelancers. And even in kind of early stages of lockdown, I was talking to Dave, who runs Home in Manchester, and even before we formed the group, he was saying they'd taken 1 or 2 production budgets that would have been spent over the next few months, and had just broken it down into £10,000 lump sums and just given it to 15 artists in Manchester because they could see there was a problem. And you thought that's such a brilliantly visionary way of re-looking at what your relationship with the creatives. And he said it wasn't all front-end creatives, it wasn't all directors and writers, it was makers. And
we should get him on our future labs, because
that's a really good.
One of the things that we're hopefully trying to. Actually, you've just got the money from the Arts Council, which again is a huge, an amazing thing for a group of freelancers to actually engage with this monolithic kind of weird structure with their horrible Grantian portal that you have to fill in to do, to get money. And you realise why these theatre companies to the outside world seem to be full of administrators, because they've actually got to deal with this incredibly difficult process. But actually, having kind of got that money, what we're hoping to try and do is bring together best examples of best practice. So where we've seen, like Manchester, or for example, Pitlochry or Theatre Fluid, or places where there are buildings that are struggling to have had success in employing freelancers or creating work, and bringing those together with other freelancers and trying to create sort of what we're calling labs that are based partly through my science background, which I come through about, you're testing a hypothesis, people come with ideas, other people challenge those, and then you come out of it and come up with actual concrete solutions for proper engagement.
I mean, one of the things that's potentially really exciting about that, I think, is that engagement doesn't only have to be about making shows. It can work in other ways. You can a bit like the Manchester example, you can be funded to think, or you can be funded to develop your practice. Or, when we were talking about urban creative, hubs and things like that, there's a real need to get creativity out into outside of London, beyond London, to get creative thinking, is brilliant for young people. we need to get ourselves, as you say, value work in the community, but also we need to be out there doing it and engaging with people in a way that we haven't before, that it isn't just about making theatre shows, it's about what other things can we do together and collectively. I think there's kind of extraordinary potential in that. It's quite a big subject.
It's quite a big subject, and trying to help find alternative pathways into the industry for people, so that you don't necessarily have to come through a university or drama school background, you know, and a recognition that, you know, if you happen to be really good with your hands and like making things in wood, you know, actually you could be a carpenter in theatre, you know, or you could be making costume, or all of those sort of areas where everybody's latent creativity could be harnessed a lot better, it feels to me.
And that really goes down to the heart of diversity and inclusion as well, because it's creating new opportunities and thinking for people who may have never considered the fact they could have a home in this industry. But how did you, sorry, I'm going to ask a sidebar question. How did you go from science to being a theatre designer? Because that's quite an interesting...
Well, I'd always wanted to discover the cure for cancer. And then, of course, when I got to university and started studying science, realised that it was a lot harder than that, and that it was a real long slog in terms of the way that how much work had to go in to get anywhere. And I would visit my professors who were doing amazing work, but it had taken them 20 years to get to that point. And I guess youthful impatience at that made me go. And I think it's also partly the science works about, you create a hypothesis and then you have to try and prove it or disprove it. And you have to find the means to do that. And whereas in the way arts and theatre is sort of almost the other way round, that you don't quite know what you're going to end up with. You don't know what your hypothesis is, but you know what your means are, you know your tools. And then also, to be honest, I was very lucky to be at a university with a thriving amateur theatre scene. And my best friend from school was called Sam Mendes, and he decided that he was going to direct theatre plays. And I thought, well, I'll build some sets. So I ended up doing 30 plays in 4 years, didn't get much sleep. And then, so I just always built it myself out of skips and, you know, making stuff. So that's why, and that's informed my practice ever since, of wanting to remain hands-on, an element of roughness, and then to actually being a sculptor in 3D in a space, rather than kind of an immaculate draftsman or a kind of a model maker.
I love
the route.
That idea of not quite knowing where we're going, but knowing the means by which the things that you have to build it with. It's not necessarily about answers, but I think that's very much kind of it's trying to put that creative process into the future labs as well, isn't it? That you kind of, because it's full of risk, the idea of making a show for everybody. Quite often, you know, technicians are trying things they've never tried before. You know, can we do it this quickly? Can we do it for this money? Can we, you know, you can have as much as possible in place, but ultimately that alchemy, which is putting everything together, you have no idea about the end point.
No.
But we have to keep moving forward. And I think the other thing about the future labs is that we're desperately trying to make sure that they are based on real action. So things that people can do to support the wider workforce.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's been difficult about this period is a bit like, you know, you can do two versions of a Shakespeare 2 years apart and they can become radically different because world situation, world politics has changed, the collaborators you're working with are different, and that combination endlessly shifts. And therefore, when we've been trying to work and plan on the projects that we want to do, keeping up with world events in this time has been extraordinarily difficult. So Black Lives Matter happens, and that causes a huge examination of our values and what we're doing and the influences on that. And, you know, and then at the same time we were planning our initial campaign for freelancers with holding up the little placard saying I'm a designer or whatever, and, you know, and did that now no longer have any validity with the Black Lives Matter campaign. Previously we worried, did it compete with the NHS, you know, and the COVID? So at every moment, and then also because we have a revolving door policy with freelancers, new people are continually coming in and coming into groups, which is very invigorating. but it makes it very difficult to ever kind of settle on an idea or a document, because you go, well, actually, just test it again, and have we missed the moment? And certainly with the Future Labs idea, it was all, a lot of it was started, and then suddenly the government goes, well, actually, you've got to get your application in for money by the 24th of August. And so trying to keep up with those events has been really difficult, I think. And I don't know, that's why. And then a bit of me keeps going, actually, we've just got to do it, which is what I feel like often with a show, where you just go, let's just do it. Stop talking about it. When you get to that point in the tech where I start going, just do it. Like, stop talking about it. And that's what we've got to that point really with this, where we've. But then I guess the other thing that strikes me about this quite interesting is that it is a little bit like a relay marathon, this work. We thought it might be a sprint when we started, and some people put so much energy into it, and then they kind of completely burnt out and kind of like went, I can't deal with this anymore, and I've got to go, or they've genuinely got other work. And then there are other people, perhaps like you and I, who've sort of kind of dipped in and out a bit, or I've dipped out more than you have. But knowing that you've got the long haul here, and it's a bit like that thing about taking time. This is a project that will take time and will be very difficult when we do start going back to work, because some people will get work and others won't. We'll be pushed to accept conditions that aren't the utopia that we want. So we've got, you call it a rope bridge. I think a lovely idea, where we've got the shit show now, and then we've got, in a theory, this wonderful utopia over there. And will we ever get there? And if we don't make compromises now, can we get to that other point? How do we build the bridges? Is it evolution or revolution?
Oh, that's such a good question. Evolution or revolution? It's a bit of both, isn't it? Isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so good that we do have some of the younger people coming in who are going, no, actually, we just want to get rid of all of this. And we go, no, don't get rid of that. We've lived with that all our lives. It's rather lovely. No, but actually, maybe you're too comfortable with that.
Yeah, maybe it's broken. But and I think hearing those radical voices, I mean, that's one of the great things about, going back to the conversation about working in drama schools and working in communities, is that going back into situations, really valuing the opportunity to be questioned and to question and to kind of, as you say, people have undervalued that kind of work, like going to do a show for RADA or Mountview. But actually, isn't it a privilege to be able to work with young people, to engage with a younger kind of cohort, to be challenged by them, to see the kind of what people are thinking about, that's not, out of my 53-year-old white woman's perspective, where outside my comfort zone, but also being able to do work in itself that could be more radical, because you're not under the same level of scrutiny, and it can go back to elements of play and possibility that perhaps in our more kind of traditional structured work we may have lost sight of.
Yeah, I mean, there's the European tradition of dramaturgy, something that we reluctantly engage with in this country, where people look back at productions and and a director doing production will study it and kind of all the thing, and in a way that has a danger that that you're just continually building on top of previous experience. And I suppose one of the things that is rather good about the British theatre ecology is that there's a bit of disrespectfulness and kind of going, well, actually I'm going to do it completely my way. And one of the frustrations that I've had in all my time working in the RSC is this perception there's an RSC way of doing a show or a curtain call. And I go, when did you last come and see one of our shows? Actually, I have done, sort of more modern dress productions, more kind of, radical exposed this and that. And but somehow the perception still remains that because the RSC, that's the nation it is. But I certainly love going into design schools and teaching and learning from the design students. So I do, with kind of Welsh College and Bristol Old Vic and Central School of Speech and Drama. I've been lots of places, and for me, it's seeing that there is no one right answer.
Mm.
it was so obvious when you get a group of designers together, or I'm on the Limbury Prize judges, the same thing. You know, you see, oh my God, there's all these different ways of, you know, and seeing it all laid out in front of you. And of course thinking, well, actually, I wouldn't do it like that. But it is so refreshing and really important that people realize that there is no one right way of doing it,
No.
and that you're all responding to your moment now and your circumstance and your lived life.
Yeah. Yeah. That's so important to hold on to, isn't it? To kind of ditch that sense of there's a right way. There's rigor and process and engagement, but where that's going to take you is endless. There's endless possibility. But I think process is really interesting as well, about sharing process. And really, I don't do very much in drama schools, and I think that's partly because I'm terrified of being rumbled about not knowing anything, because you so much of, I don't know again whether this is because I'm a lighting designer, so much of my process is kind of me running up hills shouting at myself, going, oh, what's it got to look like, you know, because you can't model lighting, and you've got to kind of have a sense of its dramaturgy and what it's doing and things, but you've still got no idea what it's going to look like till you're doing it, however much you, but all those things about managing fear and putting yourself into the room, and actually the best way to learn those and share those is by doing it. So that's why I think the value of spending time in those institutions is making something rather than just nipping in and out is really exciting.
Yeah, and I think we all, well, I guess we all still think of ourselves as imposters. You know, everyone has their, people might be surprised to feel that we feel like imposters. And I feel like it because actually I don't draw particularly beautiful costume drawings. My pupils all stand a bit like that. And like I've said, you know, my model making isn't the world's best. And I'm always feeling I'm a jack of all trades, master of none, you know, and I'm always working with people who are more skilled than me in their specialism. And therefore one has to be humble. You have to somehow find a way that you can gather and coerce them around the kind of themes, the ideas that you want to explore and that you're aiming towards. You know, it's a bit like setting out to climb a mountain in the Himalayas and actually going, well, look, we'll all just go to the bottom of this mountain and then let's work out how to get up it, rather than sitting in the middle of the valley, running off to different ones and coming back. And so you kind of go, well, actually learning from those people and inspiring them to do their best work enables the sum of the piece to become the best piece of work it can be, and I guess everyone has their own different vision, but I don't think I have in my head this sort of fixed thing of what it should be. It's an evolution that kind of happens, that you get to, and therefore you have to be open to everybody.
Yeah, totally. I'm thinking that's actually that the one thing that I often think the only thing that experience gives me is I panic less when it's bad. Or panic less when it's wrong, or, you know, that there are ways to, even by realizing that something isn't kind of doing what you hoped it did, you still, if you can unpick that, you can learn from it. And I think with the freelancers kind of lobbying and advocacy, we every now and again it's you know, we try something and it's not right. You know, there's been a couple of things that we thought might form into campaigns or a new social media campaign, but it's not necessarily been right. And we've kind of gone, actually, let's keep going and see what, but as you say, there's always things coming up. But we also know that the direction of travel is to get as many and as rich and as complex a workforce from this point to whenever we can start making work together again.
Keep going back to the Beckett quote of, you know, is it try hard, fail, you know, try again, fail better, you know, whatever. I probably paraphrase that badly, but that sense of, and then my other good one is, you know, hold on tightly, let go lightly. You know, that you're passionate about an idea and you think that that's the right way to go and you give it your all, and then when you realize that it's not working, let it go. just,
Yeah.
and it's the same with any design idea, or even if you've been spending, a week in a model box making something, and the director comes on. It's probably because I work with Michael Boyd, who just has no respect for model box at all, and just rips bits out and goes, oh, about that, and you go, so just let it go, and don't kind of get all precious about it. And I think that's, what we're trying to do with all of our kind of lobbying, not something that we would have thought we would be doing at the beginning of this year, that to get involved in this way. And quite how long we can keep going, I don't know, but I mean, hopefully we'll still be there. Well, hopefully we won't really be needed in a couple of years' time, but I do feel it could be quite a long journey, not to be too depressing, those of you who are just beginning in the road to drama school, but that it's going to be a couple of years at least of recreating our landscape, I suppose.
Reimagining, creative recovery. It's it's a very, this has thrown up huge numbers of questions, but there's a huge number of people who want to make it better on the other side.
Yes, yeah, and I think they're all beginning to kind of learn and listen. It does feel like some of those sort of ancient hierarchies that began when I was starting out, of the kind of, the director is God. I mean, so many other things that have happened, like the Me Too movement and all those other things, and really beginning to call out bullying or abusive behavior, the kind of things that used to happen when, we were a bit younger in the theatre, hopefully will not come back again. I wonder, Paule, whether that's a good pace to stop on, hopefully an optimistic note that we are benefiting.
I agree. I think, there's huge possibility.
That we will build back to a sort of, a kinder, more diverse, more tolerant industry, I hope.
Yeah,